your story with us this evening.
Thank you. Oh gosh, I make myself laugh. Well, now you know that I have a sense of humor. Okay, I was adopted nearly from birth, and like many adoptees, for years I dreamed of meeting my birth mother. My search began on my 18th birthday, and I was shocked to have been told on that day that that door was closed, that I would never have the opportunity to meet her. And that was very, very difficult for me. All these years, I just had this expectation. After all, it was my information. Who are these people who are keeping this from me? The family that I grew up in looked nothing alike. My mom's 5 feet, my dad's 5'7". They both have dark hair and glasses. My brother is 6'6", and people would just look at us and say, "Were you adopted?" And I always felt like it was just this big thing, that I was so different from everybody else. I was never in on conversations like, "So, what's your nationality?" "I don't know." "What do you mean you don't know?" "Well, I was adopted." And then going to a doctor's office. "So, what's the family history on this?" "I don't know. I was adopted." And that family was Jewish. I went to 5 years of Hebrew school, 3 days a week. I was bat mitzvah and everything. And I remember studying the 12 tribes of Israel, being sent home to do a family tree. And then it was explained to us that theoretically you could trace that bloodline all the way back, and just how significant it was to be one of God's chosen. Well, my classmates would remind me, as I well knew, that I wasn't really one of them. And I was called names. And I felt like I was outside of God's grace. And if I could just meet this birth family, then I could find out where I fit into this world and into God's plan, if at all. Quite frankly, God was irrelevant in our household. I never saw my parents pray. And so I just didn't know about this whole God thing. Then that 6'6" brother, who was a year and a half older than me, went on to get into quite a bit of trouble. The first time the police knocked on our door, he was in 3rd grade. Sad to say, he's been in and out of jail and prison from the age of 16. He has spent most of his adult life in prison. And when we were both in high school, my parents couldn't understand this. How they could have a daughter who's heading off to law school someday, and a son that's in all this trouble. I like to joke that my parents are quite proud of both their children. We're both involved in the law. The lawyer and the outlaw. So my dad picks up this book on the criminal mind. And there's a lot of other books out there like it that explain that socially deviant behavior is genetic. Great. We all felt quite comfortable with that explanation. So my parents didn't have to look at all the very poor choices that they made with their liberal parenting style. My dad said it was sort of his hands-off philosophy. Let them be and they'll turn out okay. And that backfired because my brother had his hands on a whole lot of trouble. But I was very pleased with this explanation as well. So then when I would go to school and people would ask me, "Eric Wasser, isn't that your brother?" I'd be able to say, "Yeah, but we were both adopted. So, we're not really related." And that became my genetic disclaimer. Well, that applied to my adopted mother as well. My mom, who raised me, is bipolar. That's manic depressive, highs and lows and mood swings. She was finally diagnosed 10 and a half years ago. She got on some medication for it, and for a while we were able to have some degree of peaceful relations. But growing up, nobody wanted to come over to my house. And as a teenager, trying to sort through this all and make sense of it, I just thought, I must come from something better. And again, if I could just meet this birth family, then I could find out just what that looked like. So at 18, I petitioned for what's called my non-identifying information. And when it arrived, it had everything you can imagine about my birth family, except for her name. It had her eye color, hair color, height, weight, age, the age of my half-brother and half-sister who were 11 and 13 when I was born, her ethnicity, religious background, occupation, educational level, detailed medical history. And I just hung on to every word. But then for my father, it said that he was Caucasian and of large build. And that was it. And I thought, that sounds like a police description. I mean, come on, she couldn't even say his eye color, hair color, nothing. And I thought it over. I mean, what could the possible explanation be? And then I called up my caseworker and I asked her, was my mom raped? And she said, yeah, I didn't want to tell you. And I was just devastated. I remember feeling so ugly and so unwanted and thinking, who would ever love me? Who's ever going to want to marry me and have a family with me? Because after all, socially deviant behavior is genetic, right? That's what we had believed, and now all of a sudden part of my genes include that of a serial rapist. And I had to reconcile that with my own life. What does that mean about who I am? Do I have this ugliness lurking inside of me? If I would give birth to a son someday, would he become a rapist? And I really believed that a nice guy would want to get involved with someone like me. I had already experienced discrimination dating with several different guys just because I was adopted. Going to meet their family or friends and being told, you know, just don't mention that adoption thing, okay? Like, as if that was something that I should be ashamed of. As if it made me a second-class citizen. And I thought, now how am I going to deal with this? And then, of course, at the same time, I thought about the issue of abortion. Because that's what you always hear about, right? Growing up, abortion wasn't talked about a whole lot in my family. When I was 12, my 16-year-old cousin had one, and I recall the discussions being that this was not a good thing. In high school, I remember studying this issue and seeing photos of aborted babies and being horrified. But I didn't identify with that. I didn't think, oh, that could have been me. No, I thought it was just some sad story where she couldn't afford to keep me, but abortion doesn't apply to my life. I thought. I turn 18, I get this information, and it has to do with my very existence. And it was as if I could hear the echoes of all those people who would say, well, except in cases of rape. Or, oh, especially in cases of rape. And now, all those people were talking about my life. And I felt like I had at least half the world against me. That there's all these people out there who don't even know me, who are standing in judgment of my life, so quick to dismiss it just because of how I was conceived. And I felt like I was now going to have to justify my own existence. That I would have to prove myself to the world that I shouldn't have been aborted and that I was worthy of living. And after a while, I had it all worked out in my head that, well, if I could just meet the certain societal standard that's out there that dictates what one's value is, if I could just make myself attractive and successful, and if I could just find that relationship where someone would love me, then I could have value and I could feel good about myself. And I figured that people could then look at me and say, oh, well, look at Rebecca. This nice, young, attractive, intelligent woman. Clearly, Rebecca shouldn't have been aborted. And then everyone would just see the light, and single-handedly, I could bring an end to abortion in this world. And thank God, I am not the savior of this world. And I couldn't even save myself. But isn't that message so prevalent in our society that your value is based upon perhaps how you were conceived, who your parents are, how smart, what you do with your life, how much money you make, what kind of house you live in? Motivational speakers go around telling people that if you could just make something of yourself, then you too could be somebody. Well, you know, not everybody has those opportunities or capabilities, and people mess up in life. And so what then? They are not somebody, or they're Nobody. Or some people would tell you that your value is based upon the sum total of your successes versus your failures. And if your successes in life outweigh your failures, well then, you're a person of value and you have something to offer this world. But if your failures outweigh your successes, if you've just messed up too many times in your life, or if your burdens outweigh your benefits, then in the ledger sheet of life, you're a liability. And you're either not worth as much as everybody else, or you're disposable. And I guess I had really bought into that lie. And I wanted to have all of my assets lined up so people could look at me and see me as being a person of value at a time in my life when I felt like I was being devalued every day. And isn't that why so many young women choose abortion? Because they think that somehow that their life is not going to be worth as much if they had this child out of wedlock, that would be seen as a failure, or they wouldn't be as marketable for marriage in the future, or they couldn't get their college degree in just the right amount of time, and they want to stay in the rat race, and they want to be a person of value, and they buy into abortion as being the solution. I understand what it's like to feel that way. I am settling in relationships. Like I should be thankful that somebody would want to be with somebody like me. I jumped into relationships, so if after a short amount of time and a few intense conversations, a guy was telling me that I was the most amazing girl that he'd ever met, I'd take him at his word because I wanted so much to believe that was true. I wanted to know that somebody else could see me that way. I wanted to know that I was someone who was lovable. And I just had this huge hole in my heart that I desperately wanted filled. Those relationships became very controlling. So and again, after a short amount of time, the guy was calling me up and saying, oh, cancel your plans with your family or friends. Come see me. I just want to be with you. I miss you. Like, wow, that sounded so good at the time. But I realized that over time, I was allowing myself to become more and more alienated from my family and friends, isolated and dependent upon him for my emotional well-being. And those controlling relationships became very abusive. Until ultimately, I was beat up by a boyfriend from law school. He broke my jaw. My front tooth was hanging. I had to have all kinds of surgery to have it put back in. Root canal, more surgery to try to save it. I was told I could still end up losing my front tooth someday. And after 13 years, I had to have it pulled, which again was devastating. But I was speaking at a banquet down in Alabama, and an expert in cosmetic dentistry came up to me afterwards and offered to do all of my teeth for free as part of the Give Back a Smile program for victims of domestic violence. And not just the 3 teeth with a bridge and a 4th to match, but 8 teeth with porcelain veneers, so. I share that story with you because it's just another example in my life where there was something that happened that was really, really awful. But then something beautiful came out of it. And isn't that what God is famous for? The worst evil that man has in store, God can take and use it for good, for his glory. It's the story of Joseph in Egypt, and it's the story of our Savior. And the story doesn't have to end with the violence having victory.